The story begins with Eric the Cold fighting a long war to conquer the Principality of Shidate, and here he came to the king to show off his gains. The documents of the surrender of the Principality of Shidate were handed over to the king. The territory beyond the Halric iron mine is an ancient dream that even the father of the current king could not realize. The king praised the Margrave for his excellent work. He also thought about what kind of reward to give the man. An incredible idea came to his head. The king inquired from the Margrave whether his heir, Eric, had sometimes not reached marriageable age during the war. After all, the royal family must take responsibility. The king asked with interest how old Eric was. Eric was a handsome and courageous man. He turned 24 years old, which greatly pleased the king. And then the king decided to tell what reward awaits their family. The king was determined to betroth Eric, his dearest sister, whom he cherished tenderly. The Margrave himself was not pleased with such gratitude, because it was difficult to call it a reward, rather a punishment. The former Erica was already a bride. The king's sister is a hidden princess that no one has seen. Many believed that she had died a long time ago and was no longer in this world. The Margrave wanted only one thing, to fall through the ground, but the man decided to listen silently. Residents of Pringranitchi will see the princess for the first time. The door opened, and everyone present fixed their eyes on this woman. She was a princess of the kingdom of Escalier. The king valued his sister more than anything else. Miesa Escalier entered the hall. The woman looked very unkempt and strange, despite the fact that her features were attractive. Her hair looked like it hadn't been brushed in a long time, and her feet were bare. Eric looked at the princess and could not believe his eyes. This woman will become his wife. The king explained to everyone that the woman was shy. Suddenly, the princess fell to the floor. But the king, just smiling, said that Miesa was a little unwell. The king hurried his sister to get up as quickly as possible. The Margrave could only say that it was an honor for their family to welcome the princess. Eric said through the power that he would do everything possible not to disgrace his majesty and the princess. The king wanted the future newlyweds to get to know each other as soon as possible. He invited Eric to take a closer look at the princess. The man approached, bent down, and took Miesa's hand to kiss her as a sign of acquaintance. Suddenly, Miesa jerked her hand away. She was terribly frightened. This was not surprising, because the woman did not communicate with anyone, so she became a little wild. The princess's behavior frightened those around her. The woman looked sick and weak. The king was already used to this behavior of his sister, so he did not pay much attention to how she behaved. The king only remarked to Miesa that she should not behave like that with her future husband. The woman ran to the king and fell on her knees before him like a dog. The king patted his sister on the head and said that she should apologize. It was painful to look at the princess. Her behavior caused surprise and surprise. Returning home in the carriage, Eric's parents sat in silence. Each of them had thoughts about their son's future in their heads. The Margrave was very upset because the reward was not at all what he expected. This war was long. The heroes of this war undoubtedly became the Chladni. However, the king did not like it, so he came up with this marriage. It was a kind of reward for unwavering loyalty. Instead, they got only a crazy princess. Eric understood that he could not refuse the king's order. This wedding is inevitable, even if this marriage is unwanted. As a young Lord Cold, he must fulfill his duties. Eric was slowly eating his dinner and thinking about his future. Eric's cousin, Ambric Chladni, asked what to do with the engagement to the Crispin family then. The father, hearing his son's conversation with his cousin, decided to intervene. The Margrave, holding a glass of wine in his hands, tried to explain to the men that the marriage with Crispin would be annulled, because this tyrant king had deliberately arranged all this to disrupt Eric's wedding. Eric's mother, Taliesa, also poured herself a glass of wine to relieve the tension, because such events are very exhausting and tiring. She wished her son happiness, and now her daughter-in-law will be a sick and crazy woman. The maids discussed with Taliesa where Miesa would sleep when she moved into the estate with them. The bedrooms in their house are connected by a passage, and the princess was unwell. The maids decided that if something happened to the princess at night, it would be a disaster. Taliesa decided that she could have servants attached to Miesa. The maids hurried to refuse the woman, because the king would be angry that some servants would take care of his own sister. From the words of the servants, it appeared that Eric himself should look after the princess. Eric's mother was very angry that the king would dare to order the heir of Kladna to do such a thing. Her son must not watch over a mad woman, even if she becomes his wife. That night was filled with bitterness and resentment, but Eric still tried to remain calm. The young lord had no choice but to follow the king's order. Finally, that day has come. A wedding was announced between a brave knight who had returned from war and Princess Miesa. This event brought smiles to the war-weary people. Of course, everyone is excited. For those who do not suspect the truth, it is like a fairy tale. Despite all the troubles, Eric tried to keep himself in his hands, but sincerely believed that he would be able to overcome everything. People discussed that they will soon see the princess, because there will be a wedding, and she will appear in person. Those around her were interested in what she became, how she grew up. There were various gossips about her, but no one knew the truth until the end. The Margrave arrived and the gossip stopped. There was silence in the hall. A knight approached the enraged lord, who was already out of his mind, and whispered that His Majesty the King would not be able to attend the wedding. The knight also reported that the princess had arrived safely. McGrath was sure that the king was just mocking him. He was already angry, but the absence of the king at his own sister's wedding was already a disgrace. Distinguished guests were asked to take their seats to participate in the wedding ceremony. Eric was asked to take a place on the pedestal. The young lord was waiting for his bride. He was dressed in white, elegant clothes, but despite his excitement, he tried to look calm. The princess entered the hall. Servants led her by the arms. The guests noticed that the woman was frail. Someone even exclaimed that the bride looked like she was drunk. Miesa could barely walk. She would not have been able to do it without outside help. Eric and the priest were waiting for Mies at the pedestal. Eric was horrified to see the state of his future wife. The priest loudly announced the names of the bride and groom. He also declared them partners before God. Later, according to tradition, there was a kiss. Eric tried to hold his bride as gently as possible, and their lips met in a passionate kiss. In the evening, after the wedding, the bride stayed at her husband's estate. The maids asked Eric not to harm the princess on their wedding night. Another maid said she would come in the morning to collect the marriage certificate. Eric entered the bedroom where his bride lay. The princess's hands were tied to the bed. The young lord took off his outer garment. Eric was in great athletic shape. His body looked toned and strong. Eric saw bottles of medicine not far from the bed. He decided it was soothing, but this amount would be enough to put a horse to sleep. Lord did not understand how a person who is on the verge of fainting can be given a sedative. They don't even treat prisoners of foreign countries like that. Eric understood that this could not be done without the king's knowledge. The Lord was very sorry for his now wife. The princess lay on the bed as if half dead. Eric did not realize how it is possible to shamelessly do such a thing without any hesitation. He carefully took the princess's legs to untie them. Miesa was cold. Lord thought that her body temperature had dropped a lot. The princess's legs were red where the rope was wound. Eric assumed that the princess was in pain because her hands were still tied. Eric decided to free his wife's hands as well. Her wrists were also red, with rope marks on them. How can you abuse a person like that? The Lord noticed that the tips of the princess's fingers were red. It was probably due to the fact that she had been tied up for a long time. The man believed that it was dangerous to leave her alone in such a state, but he had no other choice. Eric told his wife that he would crawl under the covers for a while and asked her not to be scared. The man told her that his name was Eric. He was the son of the Kladna family. He is 24 years old and has no brothers. The Lord also told that he had a younger sister, but she died due to an accident when he was still very young. Because of the war, he lived in the Principality of Shidare. Today was their wedding. Eric didn't know if the princess understood him or not, but he felt more at ease when he explained everything to her. Winter abroad is quite cold, and frostbite begins at the tips of the fingers. It is very important that the blood circulates normally throughout the body. The girl's complexion returned to normal because Eric covered her with a warm blanket and also helped her to warm up, lying next to the princess. He believed that after sleep, the princess should feel better. Now the Lord needed to create confirmation of the wedding night. Eric decided to put 2 glasses on the table. He also figured out how to smear a piece of bedclothes with blood, as if it were the blood of Miesa herself. In the morning, the Lord gave this sheet to the maids so that the confirmation could be given to the king. Of course, nothing happened between the newlyweds at night because Eric could not hurt the woman who was already in a bad mood. One of the maids decided that it was time to change the princess's clothes, but Eric stopped her. He explained that the princess hadn't woken up yet, and that would have to be postponed until later. Eric, entering the princess's room, could not believe his eyes. The wife sat on the floor and chewed the blanket. The man thought that a certain Miesa had lost her mind, because a person with a normal psyche will not do such a thing. The Lord decided that his wife was hungry, so he asked her to wait until he told her to prepare food for her. But Miesa continued to chew the blanket. It was painful to look at her. She needed love and care. Eric took a croissant from the table and held it out to his wife. She reached for the croissant with her thin fingers and began to eat. Eric was genuinely glad that Miesa liked the treat. She looked at her husband like a child with her big eyes. Despite her illness, she was a beauty. Eric returned home and brought the princess with him. Father and mother looked at the newlyweds with displeasure. The Margrave did not understand why they and their son had such a fate. The father ordered his son to rest. Miesa, left unattended for a few minutes, climbed onto the bear statue. It was high and dangerous. The unfortunate girl herself did not understand what she was doing. Eric quickly ran to remove his wife. The man's parents nervously watched the situation. She felt sorry for her only son. Why was he destined to marry a sick woman? The maids came to Eric to take Miesa and give the Lord a chance to rest. But the man objected and ordered them to unpack their luggage and rest from the long journey. The servants breathed a sigh of relief that they had a chance to rest instead of guarding a mad woman. Eric ordered the butler to take care of Miesa with care because she was not healthy, and from today she became a member of their family. The butler assured Eric not to worry, as they would do everything possible to make the princess feel comfortable. The family gathered for dinner. Mies was also present. Eric, having a good heart, considered it his duty to take care of his wife. So he decided to let the maid go and help the princess eat. The servants refused to go, because during the meal, the princess created many problems. Eric carefully asked if the princess had any favorite foods. He was told that Miesa is not picky about food, and she likes absolutely everything. Lord cut the food into pieces and kindly began to feed his wife. He understood that she had not received real love and care from those around her for a long time. Suddenly, Miesa spat a piece of meat straight into the Lord's face. The man was a little worried, but Miesa suddenly got up, threw everything off the plate, started screaming, and wanted to throw the plate on the floor. Miesa began to scream in a voice that was not her own, as if she were a beast. Eric tried his best to calm her down. The maids just looked at this terrible picture with a smile. Eric, trying to calm the princess, told the maids to help her come to her senses. Lord was very sorry for his wife. He understood that it was not easy for the girl to live with the king because she probably did not receive proper care. Eric and his parents decided to finish the dinner. The father was furious with both the king and the poor girl. He even menacingly asked his son if there was a need to keep the princess alive. The frightened mother interrupted Markgraf, imagining with horror what would await them in such a case. The king will simply kill them, and they will follow Miesa. Eric sat in silence, listening to the nonsense of his parents. There are 3 families in the kingdom of Esquilier called pillars. The Salaquez family is responsible for the internal stability of the kingdom. The Crispin family is responsible for internal security, and the Kladna family for external security. Each of these families made a great impact on the army and the defense of the kingdom. The previous King Esquilier had 3 wives from different families. The first queen, the daughter of Duke Salaquez, bore him a prince. This prince was the current king, the tyrant Marmalik II. He did not fulfill his royal duties and created tyranny under the pretext of restoring royal power. The Salaquez family was destroyed by his own hands. Not satisfied with this, he began to oppress the 2 remaining families. These 2 families could no longer tolerate the king's attitude. These families entered into a secret treaty of succession and planned to rebuild immediately after the end of the war. But everything did not go according to plan. The Kladny family achieved incredible success in this war, and she received the sympathy of the people who were tired of tyranny. The king could not ignore the situation. Eric's mother decided that the princess was really crazy, and what's more, she didn't even know how to eat. She asked the butler to send people from outside. Taliesin knew that there had been no problems with this child before, so it was not a birth defect. Rumor has it that the sight of dying people in the kingdom brought her to such a state. She sincerely felt sorry for the poor girl. Father was surprisingly quite rude. He didn't like this situation very much. Eric reported that in the morning, the vassals said they were to put Emberic in his place. Marquis Crispin said that if they wanted an heir to the Cold family, then they could change Eric. This meant that Eric's position was in danger because of this crazy girl. The Margrave was wondering if Grand Duke Hegel had not yet made up his mind. The man considered him weak-willed and stupid. The king's cousin, Grand Duke Hegel, is the only living member of the royal family besides the princess. He was a necessary king in order for the coup d'etat to be recognized as legal. He became a cripple due to an accident and cannot have children. His life is close to loneliness. It is possible that one day the king will take care of his death. The Margrave was beside himself with anger. After all, nothing went according to plan. Eric looked pityingly at his father, who couldn't control himself from indignation. Recent events have left my father confused and very depressed. Eric and his mother were sitting at the table. They discussed uniting the two families through marriage. It was impossible from the very beginning. After all, when the king's eyes were open, there was no need to attract attention and arrange a wedding. Without a clear successor to the throne, convincing the nobility could take years. Talies was interested in how long the Marquis's daughter could be unmarried. Talisa believed that because her husband had been on the battlefield for a long time, his political instincts had been dulled. In a situation that was completely understandable, even to a young man, Markgraf proposed to kill a crazy child. Eric, thinking soberly, wanted to adequately assess the situation that had developed. Talisa warned her son that the princess was still a child and that he should not even think of getting attached to her. The mother convinced her son that male sympathy is superficial. Talisa was sure that her son was no different in this respect. If you have to pay for this kindness, it is better not to show it at all. Eric took his mother's words to heart. He did not want to believe that his mother wanted to get rid of the princess as well. Eric walked slowly down the hall to Miesa's room. Coming closer, he heard how the maids were talking terribly to the princess. The servants talked displeasedly about the fact that the princess was too lively today because she had eaten a lot. She also has a lot of strength. Eric decided to step in and take matters into his own hands. He decided to take care of the princess himself. Eric could not even imagine how the poor girl had been abused before. What he heard today was enough. Eric ordered the maids to leave and leave them alone. Miesa was in a good mood today. Eric sat down next to his wife and began to tell that this was their apartment in the capital. The man tried to explain that from today, she will travel back and forth between this estate and the territory of Chladni. The man continued to tell, but he hoped that his wife would like it. When Eric arrived, he thought their eyes met, but she quickly lost interest. Lord paid attention to his wife's outfit. It was always the same, but it looked like prison clothes. Does the girl have a different outfit? The couple was sitting on the bed, when suddenly Miesa spat in Eric's face. He was not offended, because he understood that she was not doing it consciously. He suggested his wife lie down and rest. He promised to come back when he finished work. As he left, the man told the princess to call him if she needed anything. Later, he returned, and his wife was already sleeping soundly in a large bed. The morning came, and the couple had breakfast together. Eric carefully asked his wife how she slept. She didn't answer, of course, but he figured she'd enjoy being talked to. Eric helped Miesa eat as usual. The man was attentive to the princess and immediately noticed that the color of her face became worse. He was surprised, because everything was fine before going to sleep. It seems that the princess had no appetite at all, but Eric insisted that she eat because she needed to gain strength. Lord placed a plate of soup in front of Miesa, but she didn't start eating, but just stuck her hand into the plate. The wife started scooping up the soup with her hands. It was a terrible sight. After the arrival of the princess to the mansion, several days passed at a frantic pace, and the atmosphere in the estate changed a lot. The young lord decided to get some exercise, so he went outside. The boys welcomed him back. It seemed that everyone wanted to say something. A heavy atmosphere froze in the air. For some reason, Margrave Chladni began to avoid family dinners. Miss Chladni expressed her displeasure, saying that the man could not control his emotions. At the same time, the vassals of the Chladna family were completely confused. No one dared to openly express their displeasure to Eric. The man always looked calm and steadfast, as if nothing had happened. Eric, coming tired from training, looked for his wife, because she was not in the room. It turned out that she was in the maid's office. Miesa was fast asleep on the floor, and the maids surrounded her with interest from all sides. The servants decided that the princess liked to sleep in their room. She was quite soft because she slept on a pile of clothes. These were the maid's clothes, fresh and washed. Women paid attention to the incredible beauty of Miesa's hair. Her curls shone incredibly and were more beautiful than gold. A young knight came to the maid's room. He immediately noticed that there were no two maids who always look after the princess. The servants complained to Eric that they looked into the room and saw that Miesa was all alone. Through a butler, the Margravine was informed that the princess was alone in the room. Since the floor was hard and cold, the women decided to put clothes under her back. Eric took his wife in his arms and gently said that he would take care of her now. The man brought Miesa to their bedroom. Before he could put her down, the princess woke up and started screaming and breaking out of his arms. The lord tried to calm his wife. He held her tightly, and finally he managed to put the princess on the bed. She was behaving very strangely. She ate her hair and crawled on the bed. After observing the princess for several days, Eric decided that she did not like him. According to the husband, Miesa for some reason believed that the lord was like a vehicle for her. The lord noticed that Miesa had a thread sticking out of her head. He reached out to pick up the trash, and his wife was quite frightened. Eric could not understand what was in this girl's head and how she saw the world around her. The night has come. Miesa was sleeping sweetly in a soft bed. Having decided to work, the young lord sat and sorted through the documents. Suddenly, Eric daydreamed and remembered that the servants from the royal castle leave the princess alone and disappear at every opportunity. Eric assumed that these two servants were definitely up to something. In addition to this, the young lord was worried about the issue of food for the inhabitants of the territory. A lot of things needed to be fixed. Eric also had another problem. As a result of the investigation, it was confirmed that his father had a repeated relationship with a woman. They had a meeting in a house on the outskirts. This girl is from the tavern. When father suddenly started discussing marriage with the Crispin family, at that time Eric was the only one who had suspicions. Looking back, Eric realized that he was right. To the knights and vassals, his father's proposal didn't seem like a bad idea. But for some reason, the lord could not get rid of his anxiety, so he carefully followed his father from that day. And then, around this time, Eric found out that the girl from the tavern was often in his father's bedroom. Then the man first encountered his father's wrongdoing. This situation left a bitter taste in the lord's mouth, but being between life and death on the battlefield, Eric was not so determined to bring up the subject. Eric wondered if this woman had ulterior motives or patrons, but found nothing of importance. Therefore, the lord decided to keep everything to himself. But after the end of the war, my father brought this woman here. The Margrave even ordered his right-hand man, Sir Kelbenig, to take her as his second wife. That's how faithful he was to her. Eric didn't have much of a choice and decided to carefully inform his mother of his father's betrayal by sending the evidence by letter. Next to Tylisa was the maid Adele, who was aware of the events. But the Margravine did not even want to hear about such a thing. She believed that she was already old and did not really care if her husband was sleeping with someone. To Adele's great surprise, the Margravine said that it was even better, because she did not want to see her husband's displeased face every morning. If Eric's mother was an aristocrat, it would be easier for her to find out about it someday. But this woman has no connections. With the exception of the former Captain Kelbenig, who sometimes comes to this house, there are no other guests. It seemed to Eric that there was no new information. To tell the truth, the mother's reaction is quite natural. Even she saw their relationship as, at best, a relationship between partners for the creation of a family. Eric watched as his wife woke up. He suggested that she continue to lie down and sleep because it was still night outside. To Eric's great surprise, the woman climbed right onto his lap and took the documents in her hands. Eric decided that Mies was interested. The princess always avoided the man, but today, on the contrary, she approached herself. Suddenly, she tore off a piece of the document. Due to unexpected events and his dissatisfaction with the king, until now, Eric did not think that he would spend his whole life with this woman, feeling new emotions. When Eric first encountered chivalry as a child, it filled him with a sense of responsibility and even pride. But reality quickly shattered this dream, no matter how beautiful it sounds. In the end, it is a blood contract with the family. In essence, you become a breeding stallion for the next generation. Therefore, Eric did not expect much from the woman who would become his wife, even if she likes to tear paper into pieces. To be more precise, after realizing his position and responsibility as an heir, the Lord did not have high hopes for a relationship with a woman. Miesa stubbornly continued to tear the documents and papers on Eric's desk. He was fed up with it, but he decided to stop her. There were documents that were very important, so the man tried to push them away from the woman. Talisa sat at the table and read the documentation. Next to her was the maid Adele. The servant said that it was almost March, and it was time to prepare the big roaster in the conservatory for the upcoming concert. Talisa, not taking her eyes off the documents, replied that it would be good to prepare a small brazier in advance, because this year is colder than usual. The Margravine raised her head and saw Miesa in front of her. The princess, accompanied by a maid, entered the room and immediately fell on her back. Everyone was a little puzzled by the arrival of the princess. Usually, Miesa stays with the servants, but today she showed a desire to come to Talisa. Marcafinia continued to call the woman a princess, as if she were a stranger to her. That woman had no idea how to address her daughter-in-law. Talisa asked Diala's maids how she should address the princess, since she had been on the border so long that she was unfamiliar with court etiquette. But the maid just stood in silence and looked at the Margravine. As it turned out, this maid and her colleague, who was not in the room at the moment, were not only useless, but did not even try to make contact with others. Adele noted that 3 generations ago there was a similar situation. The head of the family, Edward, and his wife addressed the princess by name. Since the young gentleman introduced her as his wife, Talisa decided to also call the woman by her name. Miesa smiled back at the Margravine. The woman decided that the princess liked it and approved such an appeal to her. Adele was genuinely pleased that Talisa liked Miesa. The maid asked the Margravine to take care of the princess until dinner. Talisa was not satisfied with such a request, because she heard that Miesa's servant had been wandering around idle for a long time and almost did not look at the woman. But luckily she was still bathing the princess, and it turns out that Madame Malika was never seen on the outskirts of the estate. Talisa understood that there must be a reason for the laziness of the maids. They came here to help, but in fact they do practically nothing. The Margravine and Adele sat wondering what the servants could come up with. For now, they will just have to play along. They were very worried about this situation. Talisa had a bad headache, and she asked Adele to bring her medicine from the bedroom. Against the background of such events that have unfolded recently, the Margravine was very depressed. Adele brought the medicine and gave it to Talisa. The Margravine asked if it was ordinary medicine, as if she suspected something. At the same time, Adele quietly approached another servant and said that she thanked her for good work. Miesa crawled over to the Margravine and rested her head on her lap. Talisa did not object. After all, she felt sorry for such a sweet woman. According to rumors, Miesa is about 20 years old. She was still very young. The Margravine understood that her life was not sweet before, so she wanted to be more merciful to the princess. Adele shared with the Margravine information that, according to rumors, at a young age, the girl witnessed the murder of more than half of the royal family. Talisa understood that it was difficult not to go crazy from what she saw. Even now, the poor woman was being used right and left. The Margravine saw a real beauty in the woman. But fate did not spare her, and now she has such serious consequences. Melissa has extremely beautiful eyes, and her hair is simply incredible. You just have to comb it. The Marcountess asked Adele to take care of the princess's adequate nutrition. The maid was touched by Talisa's deep feelings for Melissa. Looking at the eyes of the princess, the Margrave thought that this color was quite familiar to her. She remembered that child looking at the princess. Talisa decided that the woman needed to have her nails trimmed and her hair combed. Eric spoke to the butler, who informed him that Melissa is now with his mother and they are having a good time there. The man was happy with such news and decided to go see how they were doing. Talisa herself decided to perform all hygiene procedures for Miesa. Adele only helped her and was by her side. In addition, sharp touches could scare the princess, so it was necessary to do everything slowly and calmly. Eric entered the room, but was surprised to see what his mother was doing. He felt that something was wrong. The mother reassured her son that she was just cutting the princess's nails, because they were too long and it was uncomfortable for her to walk. Eric was surprised that it was his mother who did it. After all, it is not her nature to care for someone like that, especially for a stranger. Normally, she can feel a little sympathy, but cutting her nails is too much for her. Even with her son, Talisa was always rational. But now she looks at the princess with a tenderness that is hard to believe. The Marcountess was only very gentle with one person. It was Erica's sister. Her name was Rosa, but unfortunately she died. The mother, probably remembering Rosa, decided to show tenderness to Misa. After all, the girl's eyes reminded her of her own daughter's eyes. Eric excitedly wanted to get the scissors to finish, but his mother assured him that he would do it himself. The son still insisted that the mother give the instrument. The reason for Eric's growing anxiety was the haunting memory of his mother's behavior on the day of Rosa's death. The man simply could not help but intervene. Eric took Misa's fragile leg and finished cutting his wife's nails. The princess lay politely and calmly, allowing her to do this important procedure. Suddenly, the princess's face began to look not very good. Adele was a little worried. Miesa took a cookie from the table herself and ate it, and she seemed to feel better. Previously, Misa calmed down when she was given sweets. Looks like the princess likes goodies. Eric noticed that his wife was eating carefully, biting off each bite. Talus was very happy with her daughter-in-law's success. The woman was sincerely glad that Miesa had started to eat well, but hoped that she, being surrounded by care, would begin to feel much better. While with Miesa, Talisa remembered her daughter Rosa. Eric did not understand what it was that caused his mother to love the princess. Maybe the eye color is very similar, but the man did not see any other similarities. But if it's about the color of the eyes, then there is a cousin Amberic who has the same eyes. But his mother never treated him in a special way. The butler brought roasted quail for dinner. Eric immediately asked the man to put the dish on the table and left. The lord thought for a moment that when he and his wife had dinner alone, she behaved quite calmly. Perhaps the sensitive Mies is upset by a large number of people and excessive attention. When there is peace and quiet, she feels quite comfortable. Eric watched worriedly as Miesa suddenly clutched her head and began to moan. Obviously, she started to have a headache. The husband thought that it might be the quail that was standing on the table next to his wife. Although the servants told Eric that the princess had no favorite food, the man still asked to take away the dish. After all, everything was fine before this dish appeared on the table. Miesa really calmed down. Eric could not understand anything. How could the sight of food provoke such a reaction? Perhaps the appearance of this dish reminded the princess of something terrible. It remained a mystery to him. The worried maid watched as Miesa lay on the floor. She decided, as usual, to lay something soft for her. Others simply stood aside. They did not understand what this servant was muttering under his breath. The heartless maids, quietly mocking, decided that the young lady did not even understand what Miesa was saying, but continued to talk to her. And it was also unclear whether the princess understood her or not at all. The servants also did not know why the young lord was also doing this, talking to the princess quietly, as if muttering something. One of the servants, grimacing, began to show how the lord wears miesu. The maids were surprised that the lord was very careful with Miesa. He carries her all the time, and her feet never touch the ground. Perhaps it was even envy. The maids went too far. They gossiped about the lord. They believed that Eric had never been interested in women before, but he cared so tenderly for this crazy woman. And the servants seemed to be happy that the couple had a close relationship. But they considered it abnormal. One of the maids turned out to be smarter, but asked them to stop these silly conversations, because the walls also have ears, and if anyone hears about it, they will simply be thrown out of here. One of the servants drew attention to the princess's clothes, because she could be dressed better, but the other objected, motivating it by the fact that her clothes get dirty quickly from food. One young lady suggested just making a bib for Misha, because it would be quite comfortable and the clothes would be a little nicer to wear. The girls have already imagined how wonderful it will be, bright and with embroidery. Eric, as usual, was playing sports with the men outside. They fought with swords. He thought about the lunch he had missed and thought about his wife, how she was feeling, and whether she had a good lunch. After all, this morning she did not look very well. On her first day at the estate, the princess looked very weak and spent the entire day in her room. Maybe she didn't really have lunch, and she could not play well with the servants. Eric wasn't sure he could entertain his wife as well as the servants did. Eric met the butler, and the man told him so much. Before dinner, the princess fell into a stream. Later, she changed her clothes, ate, and slept. She was now in the servant's study. Eric was surprised by such events. Eric asked the butler what happened and how she fell there. It seems that Misa saw a fish in the stream when she was walking to the chapel with Tylisa and fell into it. Eric decided that if the princess was with his mother, it wasn't very safe. Still, Misa was busy all day. Dvoretsky noticed that Eric's wife did not like the chapel very much. Eric thought that the chapel was a rather boring place for his wife because she would not be able to sit down for a long time. It all started with the fact that Tylisa suggested the princess to visit the chapel because it is quite beautiful and soulful there. Miesa followed the Margravine at first, but as soon as they arrived, she began to fuss at the entrance. For this reason, Miesa remained with the maid outside until the service was over. Eric thought with a smile that if they were eating sweets there, she would definitely like it there. Eric ordered the servants and the butler to make sure that there were always sweets on the table from today. The Lord was pleased that something brought his wife a little joy. At Eric's request, they were immediately brought a plate of delicious food. Lord immediately began to feed Mies. His soul was warm and calm because his wife, as much as possible, was enjoying the food. Eric saw how joyful and energetic Misha had become. Meat and vegetables benefited her. Suddenly, a piece of food fell on the princess's dress. The husband immediately took it, but wanted to throw it away, but the stubborn wife kept trying to eat this meat. Stubborn Mies wanted the dirty piece of meat that had fallen so badly that she even bit Eric's finger, who purposefully wanted to pick up the piece. The princess began to get angry, not for a joke. In one moment, Miesa quickly and deftly pulled the tablecloth over her, and all the food fell and spilled on the floor. There was a loud clatter from dishes that had been smashed. The young lord tried to control himself. He was not even angry, but rather felt sorry for the princess, because he understood that she had become like this through no fault of her own. One by one, the maids began to look in the crack of the door, because they were wondering what was going on there and why there was such a noise in the room. Eric sat at the table, silently considering the mess his wife had made. A plate had been knocked over her head, so the princess had to be washed and changed again. A bib wouldn't help in this situation. One of the maids was very surprised at Eric's endurance. Not everyone can stand it. Each time the princess's meal did not go completely smoothly, but the man is probably already used to it and put up with it. Finally, the evening came, and the couple went to bed. Eric's head was a complete mess. Ever since the Lord's finger accidentally entered Misa's mouth, he still felt warmth on his fingertips. Eric did not understand his feelings for the princess. Although she is his wife, she is no different from a child. Perhaps she does not even understand that he is her husband. A princess is not a woman that a lord can consider romantically. You can't. Never. He understood that she was like a child and a little crazy, but at the same time so cute and gentle. In the morning, everyone gathered at the table. Tylisa was already used to the fact that the princess often lay with her head in her lap. She even started to like it. The maid reminded that there would be a poetry evening this Wednesday. There will be many people this evening, so the Margravine was worried that Miesa might be frightened. Eric asked his mother if they had to go there. The mother answered yes, without a doubt. Tylisa assured her son that everyone, like hyenas, will be looking for a piece of meat, so they need to show them that everything is fine. And don't even pretend that it's not easy for them sometimes. The long-awaited evening of poetry has arrived. It sounds grandiose, but in reality, it is a meeting where the matriarchs of like-minded families gather to discuss the corruption of the royal family and other families once a month. This is a great place to gather the information you need. This time, it was time for the Kladna family to hold a meeting. Because of this, work on the preparation of the greenhouse has been simmering in Kladna's house for several days. Everyone expects Marquise Crispin and her only daughter Lakin to come to this meeting. As this is the first meeting between the two families since they broke off their engagement, it interested absolutely everyone. Although there was no question that they would look for those responsible for breaking off the engagement, but the families will feel quite uncomfortable, because everyone will whisper about it. Before the evening of poetry, the family gathered again at the table. As if by tradition, Miesa was lying on the Margrave's lap and eating delicious cookies. Tylisa offered to go look at the beautiful greenhouse, which was almost ready. Eric asked his mother if Mies was interesting today. The mother, smiling, said that he was asking her like a nanny who takes care of his child. The princess was indeed a kind of child. The mother invited Eric to join them and visit the greenhouse together, But it turned out that the son had a lot of business and work that had accumulated, so he was forced to refuse. Eric came briefly, just to visit his wife. Nevertheless, he decided to look at the greenhouse for a moment. Eric could not refuse his mother, especially since recently she'd become more gentle and kind. During the walk through the greenhouse, Miesa behaved like a child, and of course those around her noticed it. One lady even called the princess a little rascal. Miesa enjoyed looking at various flowers and plants. Eric was pleased to watch his wife enthusiastically spend time. He could see that she had changed a bit since she moved in with them. Miesa wanted to touch every flower. It was nice to watch. And Eric's strained heart seemed to relax a little. The maids were very happy to meet the princess in the greenhouse. They carried a pigeon in a cage and asked why Miesa did not come into the study, as he used to. The sight of the bird made the princess sick. She had terrible memories. Miesa seemed to see black crows circling over the bodies of her dead relatives. The poor woman was drawing terrible memories in her head, which instantly overwhelmed her. It seemed to the princess that the dove was talking to her. He said that her mother had made a mistake. Even if it is a mother, she will be punished if she makes a mistake. That is why it is possible now, mother. And it seemed to the woman as if the parrot just wanted to swallow her. The princess felt very sick from this horror. She screamed madly. But in one moment, she fell to the floor. All the people who were in the greenhouse were quite frightened by the condition of the girl. Confused, Eric immediately ran to his wife. He could not understand what had happened because she was calmly walking and enjoying the plants. And nothing called for trouble. Miesa threw herself into her husband's arms and cried a lot. She was filled with strange emotions. Everyone understood that for some unknown reason, the princess was afraid of the bird. One of the maids said that Miesa was not just afraid of birds, but she always had a peculiar character. Tylisa and the maid Adele were quite angry with the two servants who had arrived here with the princess. After all, they should have warned about such a fear of Miesa. But these insolent servants only said that they had completely forgotten about such a trifle. They justified themselves by bathing and changing the princess every day. Women believed that this was quite enough, and nothing else was included in their duties. Tylisa had not been satisfied with the work of these servants for a long time, but they should have reported about such things in advance. Poor Miesa did not stop crying. Fear enveloped her all the way to the tips of her fingers. Eric decided to take his wife to the room so that she would calm down. The princess's body was shaking violently. Eric decided that from today, there will be no bird on the table. Also, there will be no birds in the greenhouse, as previously planned. Tired Miesa only shouted in response. Eric invited his wife to go to the garden. But suddenly, he remembered that there might be birds there too, and that made Eric a little wary. Perhaps all this time Miesa felt locked in four walls. After all, she was seen outside as a child. And then the king did not let her out to human eyes. Eric still decided to go to the garden with his wife. Miesa spent every day inside the estate, so the man decided to take a little walk with her. They sat on a wide swing, and Eric rolled his wife, gently talking to her so that she would not be afraid and relax. Eric promised the princess that he would drive away all the birds that would fly here. He tried to show his wife as much care and tenderness as possible so that she felt more relaxed and free. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a man who approached them. But Eric did not really want to talk to him. However, the man stood persistently and tried to start a conversation with the young lord. Amberic, whom Eric did not ask anything, began to tell that rumors had reached his house about him and his crazy wife. Eric's uncle liked to curry favor with the other family members in order to make his son Amberic the heir to the family. Do not take lightly the gossip that spreads outside. Amberic, smiling, said that he knew everything from the words of the red-haired maid Bina, who serves here. Bina was only recently hired. Apparently, she and another servant are telling everyone about the non-whites. Eric did not like such news. Amberic, who prefers freedom, does not want to take responsibility and be an heir. The man has trusted Eric since they fought together on the battlefield, trusting each other with their lives and sharing what could be their last words. Amberic has long supported Eric in the fight against his uncle, his father. Eric felt that he owed Amberic. Amberic said that thanks to Eric, he had had a lot of fun the last few days. The man questioned Eric about his feelings for his wife, because judging by the gossip, he learned that Eric personally cut Miesa's nails. Eric said that he simply could not stand aside when his mother took care of his wife's hygiene, and he decided to just help, nothing more. After all, He was uncomfortable that his mother was doing this. Eric was also stunned by the rumors that Miesa's feet did not touch the ground because her husband carried her everywhere. Today, he was personally convinced of this. Eric, excusing himself, explained that it was difficult for the princess to walk, and he was responsible for her, so he feels that it would be right to take care of her. Eric was stunned that Eric cared for the princess from the bottom of his heart. He used to think Eric was bluffing. Eric, hearing such gossip, thought that Eric had staged a brilliant theater to deceive the king. Eric tried to understand why Eric cared so much for his wife. After all, the king deliberately broke off his previous engagement and forced him to marry his sick sister. Eric did not understand at all why Erica had such a wife. He believed that it would be more logical to get rid of her as soon as possible. The man convinced Eric that he was almost engaged to Lakine Crispin until this misunderstanding happened. But Eric did not want to listen to Eric at all. You cannot return what has passed. Eric just said that for now. Taking Miesa into the family benefits them. That's all that matters. And for a while, the king will still leave them alone. The young lord sincerely believed that there was nothing better than the option he had chosen. It is inevitable, but the better choice. Eric understood that Miesa did not even know whose lap she was sitting on now and how she was being treated. Eric decided that the princess had such a difficult fate, and it was not worth making her even more unhappy. After all, everyone around treats the princess like the plague. A few days later, the day of poetry came. One by one, the ladies who are allied with the Cold family arrived in the conservatory, including the mother and daughter of the Crispin family. After everyone had taken their seats, Eric and Miesa came in briefly to greet them. In one moment, hundreds of eyes began to look at them, and insincere greetings became an additional bonus. Throughout the meeting, the uncomfortable atmosphere between the Chladni family and Crispin was noticeable to everyone, although everyone pretended that it was not so. Eric got up from the table, taking Miesa in his arms, and informed everyone that they were leaving because his wife was not well. He wished everyone a good evening and went to the room with his wife. Lakine Crispin caught up with the lord because she wanted to tell him something. Eric wasn't thrilled, but stopped anyway. The woman just haughtily told the couple not to have children. Eric was puzzled by such words. Lakine Crispin lightly, so that the lord would not see, threw the handkerchief on the ground as she had agreed with her mother. She also wished Eric all the best and left. Upon the daughter's arrival, the mother asked her whether the girl had done everything properly. Lakine said yes. The woman said that she was disgusted by the way the couple happily hugged each other. Lakine was jealous of Eric's wife, because he was supposed to be her husband. The girl saw that Miesa was quite beautiful, and she was one of those women that men liked. She has a cute face and knows how to laugh. Only she forgot that the woman was sick. Mother Lakine was nervous because it was her daughter who had to enter this family. That's the only way they can get the treatment they deserve. But the king disrupted their plans. You could say that Lakine Crispin was raised for inheritance, not taught anything but to be a housewife. Recently, Eric's brain has been overloaded with affairs and problems. Also, the father is infatuated with his mistress and neglects family affairs. Most of the family affairs fell on Eric's shoulders. One of the biggest problems this summer, in the conditions of the long war, which led to significant human and property losses among the population, was the lack of food. If they can survive this summer, then the soldiers returning to their fields will reap the harvest and the situation will stabilize. Considering the Chladni family had played a huge role in the recent war, they deserved enough rewards to avoid these problems. However, the king's reward for the Chladni family was a few minor war trophies and the Halrik iron mine, gifted for visibility to the people, and of course, a single princess. The development of the Halrik iron mine will take years, which will not help with today's food shortage. The main thing is to understand how to dispose of what they have now for the purchase of food. Since the king turns a blind eye to this, families must provide themselves with food. And it's not about finances at all. The main problem is the absence of a margrave, which forced the vassals to look to Eric for a leader. The unexpected responsibility and high expectations from everyone is more painful than Eric thought. It's all like a mushroom pressing down on Eric with its weight. It is incredibly difficult for a man to keep everything to himself. While Eric was busy working, Miesa woke up. It was night outside. Unexpectedly for the man, the princess came and hugged him. For a second, Eric's face appeared in Eric's mind, which was full of incomprehension. Eric did not understand himself. The very fact that Miesa did not run away, but remained in his arms, brought considerable comfort to the man's troubled heart. The maids of the Crispin family came to Tylisa to report that Milady's handkerchief was lost somewhere on their estate. In the upper community, a handkerchief is an object that is exchanged between a man and a woman as a sign of love. For an unmarried lady, losing a handkerchief in the estate of a former fiancé and now a married man is a very serious problem. Tylisa ordered Adele to have their maids search for the handkerchief with them as well, and so that gossip does not spread. The Margravine looked at everyone with a menacing look. Tylisa asked Adele for the woman to say that this handkerchief belonged to the Marquise. Adele understood everything and nodded her head. All the servants were looking for a handkerchief outside. While no one was seeing, the maid Crispin was talking to the princess's maid, Diala, who had arrived here with her. The woman reported that it will take 2 years to deal with Miesa. The women agreed to keep in touch, because it is difficult to come up with reasons and excuses for visiting the Margrave every time. The women agreed to meet in the city. They agreed on the desired day and time of the meeting. Today, for the first time in a long time, the whole family will gather for dinner. The Marcountess asked the princess to be calm, but Miesa was just chewing on a cloth napkin. The Margravine decided that the princess should be well fed, then she is calmer. The woman, looking at Miesa's neck, wondered how it could be so thin. While Thalis was combing the princess's hair and talking amiably to her, the Margrave entered the room. His gaze seemed angry and stern. They ate in silence for a long time, but suddenly, the Margrave shouted something rudely in the direction of the princess. He did not like this woman at all, and he frankly did not understand why everyone was messing with her like that. Tylisa just said that Miesa is training. The Margrave looked at everyone present at the table with a surprised look. The Margrave also said that it is pointless to take care of an adult woman because she is not a child. The Margravine had no choice but to ask her husband, in this case, not to pay attention to the princess. Everyone was so kind to Miesa that the Margrave was sick of them. At the table, his behavior left much to be desired. The Margrave was incredibly nervous. It seemed that absolutely everything annoyed him. He shouted to Miesa that she would soon meet His Majesty, but he said to follow, so that by this time she would not fall and get injured. Eric remembered that, indeed, the meeting was still a few days away. The man even managed to prepare gifts for the palace. He sincerely hoped that by this time nothing would happen to his wife and she would behave well. In the kingdom of Escalier, there is a tradition for the couple to visit their relatives 50 days after the wedding. For Miesa and Eric, it is a palace. The long-awaited departure day has arrived. The maids made sure that all the necessary things were collected. The Lord watched in surprise from the carriage, as for the first time in his entire stay at the estate, a servant from the palace was doing his job. The wife that Eric took under the sympathetic gaze of those around him, when he gave up all expectations of marriage, turned out to be not so bad. Eric, looking at his beautiful wife, decided to ask if she knew his name. But the princess was silent. Miesa may not have known who he was, but having someone to protect filled the Lord's life with some meaning. The couple together with the servants arrived at the king's palace. Sharp sunlight penetrated through the huge windows. Cold gray marble covers every inch of the central palace. This seems frightening, but given the king's actions, it only adds to the anxiety. 20 years ago, the young king ascended the throne. He stabilized his power without much effort, thanks to the incredible power of his mother, Salakaza's family. But 20 years ago, when many were at war, something happened in the capital, and the king's behavior changed dramatically. The floor in the central palace was always smeared with blood. They didn't have time to clean up the blood when the next head rolled across the floor. Every step on the stone floor evokes the icy soul of the thought whose body lay here. The bride and groom approached the king and greeted each other. His Majesty noticed that his sister had changed for the better. Her complexion had improved since the last time they had seen each other. Suddenly, the king said that if Miesa is feeling better, why shouldn't the young couple think about adding to the family? Eric tried to be very careful to avoid the king's suspicions about the first wedding night. Eric plucked up courage and began to invent as he went what to say to the king. Eric replied that he was hoping for a refill, but he didn't want someone who wasn't completely healthy to feel pain. Eric tried to explain that his wife's health had not yet fully recovered. The king interrupted the Lord's conversation, saying that you can always take a child from the children's core. The servants told something interesting to the king. According to them, the evidence of the first wedding night was covered in blood, But when they came to wash the princess, she was completely undamaged underneath. In fact, from the wedding night until now, the bed and the body of the princess remained untouched. The king directly asked Eric why he did not sleep with his sister. The king questioned more loudly why Eric did not want an heir from the royal family. The king was emotional. He spoke to the Lord in very raised tones. Marmaduke asked loudly if Eric had not touched the princess, and if he wanted to dissolve the marriage with the help of the priests. But Eric objected, because he really didn't mean anything bad. The young lord could not even think that the maids could convey such intimate details to the king. The king continued to accuse Eric also of the fact that the wedding was held at the Hladny estate, and thus the lord made a mockery of the royal family. Eric stood alone listening to these ridiculous accusations. He meant no harm. He did not want to hurt the princess during the wedding night, and cared for her from the bottom of his heart. The king saw this situation as a rebellion against the royal family. He went too far. In Eric's opinion, once the king said the word confrontation, there was no way out. Eric's life may now be in danger, but the Lord began to fear for the lives and health of his parents and servants who followed the Hladny family, because the cruelty of the king knows no bounds. Eric took 13 knights with him to the capital. If anything, they won't be able to stand against the royal guard and the city's defense forces. The king called Miasu to him. He asked the princess if her husband undressed her at night. The woman was silent, so the king, violently seizing her by the hair, asked the question once more, but in a more rude form. Eric was very angry at what the king was doing. The Lord, in turn, tried to make Miasu feel safe and comfortable, and it was painful to watch how the king behaved intemperately. Miasu only whispered that she was in pain. Eric continued to plead with the king to let the woman go. To Eric's great surprise, Miasu said that she was in pain and pointed to her private part with her hand. Although Miasu was crazy, she still understood something, because she managed to deceive her brother in favor of her husband. She continued to show her brother with her hands what her husband was doing to her. At once, the king interrupted her, saying that he did not like to hear about his sister's love affairs, and said that it made him lose his temper. The king just unceremoniously kicked the princess. The woman fell to the floor. It was very unpleasant for Eric to see how the king behaved with his wife. The couple was returning home in a carriage. Miasu saved them all. Eric could not even think that she would tell a lie in his favor. Otherwise, no one would return home. Eric, putting the princess on the bed at home, listened to her say short phrases. Earlier, she did not speak so clearly, or rather, the woman was silent almost the entire time. Eric could not believe his ears. It turns out that the woman was not as crazy as she appeared. She pretended to a greater extent because she was surrounded by servants from her palace and those around her who at any moment could tell everything to the king. Miasu felt that the man could be trusted. She spoke to him in a firm yet elegant tone. Miasu said that they are like hyenas in search of meat, so you need to show everyone that everything is fine. These words were very familiar to Eric. Despite the princess's sweet face and relaxed voice, her hand was shaking slightly from tension. Eric told the princess that he didn't want to pressure her. It was hard for him to believe that the woman was so reserved. What thoughts were in her little head all this time, the Lord could only guess. It was rumored that Miasu witnessed her mother's death when she was only 8 years old. And after that, she must have witnessed the king killing other family members. In order to survive, she chose to endure scorn and ridicule. The princess used to be treated like an animal. After thinking about how the princess lived all these years, the Lord realized that he was at a loss for words. They had only recently met, and Eric couldn't comfort her or tell her that the years of suffering were unfair. Still, Eric decided that banal, superficial comfort would at least somehow calm the princess. The husband wanted to say something to his wife, but he seemed to swallow his tongue, and he silently left the room. But Eric was immensely pleased that his wife understood him all this time. In the morning, the maids came to wake up the couple. The butler brought them breakfast. The servant came closer to the princess to wake her up. At the same time, Eric sat with the thought that his wife had saved him from the king. The Lord began to insist that the maid should leave his wife alone and let her sleep. After all, she was quite tired after the trip. Dvoretsky suggested that Eric eat breakfast himself, since he has many important things to do today. It seemed that the butler and the maid had come to check whether the couple had confirmed their marriage later. But maybe it's better if they get it all wrong. The breakfast that Eric ate alone after a long break is like sand. He is already used to eating alone. He missed his wife by his side. Miasu woke up and made a to-do list for today to continue pretending to be crazy. First, she planned to make a mess on the table, then to tear the clothes left by the black-haired man. She also planned to pull out a lock of gray hair from the maids. It turned out to be a tough day with the medicals, but luckily, Miesa made it through. The princess was thinking about the black-haired man. She was afraid that he might tell someone her secret. Miesa thought that Eric was very angry with her yesterday. The princess was worried that her secret might reach the king, and she was afraid to think how it could all end for her. The princess reassured herself that although Eric looked angry, he did not wish her any harm. But fear took hold of the woman for a reason. Miesa came to the room where the margrave was. The woman worriedly asked why the princess was walking around the estate without servants. Tylisa thought it was quite dangerous for Miesa. The princess walked over to Tylisa and rested her head on her lap. The margravine seemed to suspect the strange behavior of the princess. Later, Miesa decided to chew on the margravine's dress, and she calmed down, realizing that everything was fine. Tylisa discussed with the butler what would be needed to arrange their garden. They also discussed repairing the garden fence. Miesa listened carefully to everything because she was alone in the room. In the garden in the palace, they used a zadan tree, which was brought to them from the southern islands. It cost 5 times more. Miesa wondered in her mind that importing materials was quite expensive for this house. The princess had only been to the royal palace and Celia's palace, so she didn't really understand these matters. Butler noted that the Rogenton family's dairy farm had recently begun making butter and cheese. It is expensive, but it is considered high quality. Therefore, the butler brought it in a small amount. Tylisa decided to treat the princess with a piece of butter. She carefully placed it in the girl's mouth. Miesa, listening carefully to the conversation, calculated that a small piece of butter was worth as much as a sack of flour. Miesa knew that Eric was worried about people not going without food. She decided that if money is so tight, then you can buy a bag of flour with this money. Miesa's thoughts were interrupted by the margravine. She sincerely looked at the girl and asked if she liked it. Miesa continued to listen to the conversation and do her own calculations. The princess was touched by the fact that Eric and the margravine were happy that she was just eating. Miesa couldn't understand why, but whatever the reason, this kindness couldn't be for her. At least she was sure of it. It seemed to Mies that no one in this world would do such a thing for the plague princess. Eric came to the estate. Unexpectedly for the lord, Miesa did not want to go to him in his arms. She rushed to Tylisa, but asked the woman to save her because she did not want to go to this man. Eric, without thinking for a long time, immediately took the princess in his arms. Miesa's surprise knew no bounds. He gently said that it was better for her to behave more calmly. He also said that he did not tell anyone about the secret and was not going to. The couple sat down to dinner. There were delicious and exquisite dishes on the table. Eric, looking at Miesa, asked if she could eat herself. She had no choice but to start eating herself. After all, he knows her secret. Mies didn't really like the lord. The woman did not like that she had to eat officially and with utensils. She ate with her hands for 10 years because she pretended that she couldn't do anything else. Miesa was not very good at holding a knife and fork, so she ate clumsily. But Eric praised her for it and said that it turned out great. Miesa was used to being helped in everything, but now, at least in the presence of the lord, she had to do everything herself. Miesa suddenly dropped her fork, took the food in her hands, and started screaming. Eric calmly watched this concert. Once the woman said that it was necessary in case the maids came and the table was clean. Miesa was afraid more than anything that no one would find out the truth. Lord just sadly grabbed his head and asked his wife to stop. Miesa thought that the man was angry. It wasn't the first time Miesa ate carelessly. Eric decided to wipe her frozen face and hands and feed her himself as before, because Miesa herself ate very clumsily, so that everything fell. The unpleasant maid shouted displeasedly to the princess that for some reason she was not sick. The maid decided that the princess would benefit from a few days of comfort. Miesa did not understand what was being said. The maid went to bathe Mies. Nothing predicted trouble. But suddenly the woman started beating the princess in the bathroom. Also called names. Eric ran at the loud noise. But the servant pretended that everything was fine, because the princess, as usual, screamed and hurt herself for no reason. And she, poor thing, just had to stop it. Also, the maid asked Eric to leave so she could finish. Eric saw from his wife's eyes that something was wrong here. He himself decided to help the princess wash, but the servant only said that it was indecent, and there was no need to do it. Eric firmly insisted that Diala leave the bathroom, because he, as the husband of the princess, wants to finish everything himself. The maid, in order to confuse Eric, invented procedures that must be done one by one for the comfort of the princess. But it was all untrue. The princess was always washed only with a rough washcloth and soap. In the palace, the maids washed the princess just terribly, as if they were washing clothes. Bathing in this house is much better. By some miracle, Eric managed to push the maid out the door, but he politely asked if Miesa could wash herself. To the great surprise of the lord, the wife replied that she would not be able to do it herself. The puzzled man blushed a little because he was ashamed to bathe the princess. All the same, he went to collect soap on a washcloth. The princess understood that if she acted on Eric's nerves, it would not benefit her. Misa dropped her towel on the floor, and she stood in front of her husband completely undressed, without any shame. According to the princess, this man may one day end the marriage and tell everyone her secret. When she first saw his large and intimidating figure, the princess decided it was best not to oppose his will as much as possible. But now Miesa thought differently. Although he is big and looks menacing, he was kind enough to her. In the end, it seemed to the princess that she would not remain unscathed here either. Eric saw huge wounds on his wife's body. It seems that they were quite serious, because the tracks were terrible. Eric asked who dared to do such a thing. There was pain in Eric's voice, unlike anything Mies had heard from him before. For some reason, the unfamiliar note of sadness in the man's voice made Miesa feel that she should at least answer him. Eric tried to finish washing the princess as soon as possible and leave the bathroom, because the princess might get sick. It was also unusual for him to be near a naked woman. It was Eric's first time washing someone, so he was a little uncomfortable. He only asked to tell the princess when she felt uncomfortable. He unexpectedly looked at his wife with pity. Eric approached such an interesting matter with responsibility. The man was very careful. Mies was quite pleased. No one had washed her so gently before. After bathing, the husband began to wipe his wife. She was tickled and pleased. It was worth it for Eric to wash his wife between the legs, but he was quite ashamed to do it. The princess made the lord feel strange for no reason at all. Finally, the bathing procedure was completed. Eric was very tired. Eric lay down on the bed exhausted. His wife lay down next to him. He gently took his wife's hand and pressed it to himself. Misa did not understand the lord. Yesterday he was upset and ungrateful, even though he was pardoned, but today he looked at her scars with sympathy. More than once, when the princess eats greedily, he cannot hide his true feelings and shows his dislike. Miesa could not understand what was in the lord's mind. Today, the wife watched her husband fall asleep, not the other way around. Still, the princess was sure that her husband was one of those rare good people. She could feel his warmth and pleasant energy. Through the crack in the door, Eric heard his wife say something. He decided to come closer and listen. She seemed to be conducting a dialogue between people. Hearing that the man approached her, she asked him not to say anything. Misa just said with a smile that she was practicing. But she continued the dialogue with herself. Eric watched his wife sweetly. The maids again began to examine the private part of the princess to see if she had anything with her husband. This happened systematically. Perhaps because of the shame this black-haired man had awakened in Mies, she felt particularly dirty that day. The princess showed Eric another strange side of her. When she pretended to be crazy, she didn't care if the finger was pointed at her. But now, when Miesa thinks that her real self will be laughed at, she becomes uneasy. The princess thinks that Eric thinks she's weird. The two nasty maids eyed the princess and reasoned that even the princess's naked body didn't turn Eric on. One of them replied that a normal man would not sleep with a madwoman. The servants were ordered to keep their eyes on the princess, so they stood by her bed. Miesa mentioned that she had no bruises or wounds for a while. In order not to arouse suspicion, she needed to fall or hit. The princess was thinking how to injure herself. She didn't want to hurt herself, so she decided to break something valuable, but changed her mind because the family is already in such a difficult situation. The princess decided that a slight fracture would be the easiest way out of the situation. The woman understood that if she controlled everything, she would not suffer too much. The princess decided to fall down the stairs. She wanted to pretend that her legs had weakened and stopped holding her. Suddenly, Eric intervened. He let the maid Diala go, but he himself wanted to take care of his wife, so the fracture was avoided today. Eric wanted to spend time with his wife in the greenhouse. He promised that the princess would not see any birds here. Eric decided to ask his wife if she really didn't like birds that much. She replied that she did not like them. The man asked the reason. Miesa began to say that the birds ate. The woman never continued her sentence. Eric could not talk to his wife. She especially did not want to raise this topic. Eric decided that it was difficult for the princess to speak. Miesa was talking well in her head, but when she tried to speak out loud, she found it difficult. It had been a long time since she had last spoken to anyone, and it turns out that she is unfamiliar with saying words from her head. Mies had never thought about it before. When she repeated someone's words, she was good at it. Eric asked his wife to respond with words instead of nodding. After all, she will learn to speak well this way. When Misha saw the man's serious look, even if she didn't want to, somehow she felt she had to respond. The princess thought that her voice sounded strange, but she was very shy. Eric tried to convince his wife that she needed to practice more. To begin with, you can only give short answers to get used to it. Eric began to tell his wife how the voice sounds, what the larynx is. He sincerely tried to explain how the conversation takes place, so that it would be easier for the princess to start talking freely. Eric took Miesa's hand, put it to his larynx, and wanted to teach her everything he knew. One day his voice broke, and he was taught how to fix it. The Lord suggested that Miesa try to tell him something. The princess started with the easiest exercises, pronouncing the sound A, A, A. Eric was a little amused when Miesa asked what a broken voice was. The man laughed, but quickly pulled himself together. He explained that this happens to men in adolescence. Miesa felt embarrassed because she had heard about such a thing for the first time. There was something the princess wanted to tell her husband. Miesa began to say what she had already heard. She said, "She is still intact, even after he sent everyone away." Eric didn't seem to understand what was being said. Miesa, not shy, spread her legs to the sides. The woman pointed her finger at her private part. Eric, blushing, quickly connected her legs. The man was embarrassed by this. The worried man asked Mies not to do that again. The woman directly asked if they would do this. Eric did not know where to hide his gaze. He had never seen his wife so frank.